West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Good evening, everyone. We begin the readout tonight with the news from the Select Committee on January 6th. For the second time in 2 days, they have issued new subpoenas. And today's batch targets the right-wing militias at the forefront of the insurrection, including the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and their respective leaders, Enrique Tarrio and Elmer Stewart Rhodes. Additionally, a third paramilitary organization called the First Amendment Praetorian was also subpoenaed. Together, these groups represent a toxic mix of ethno-nationalism, bigotry, and vigilantism. The subpoena letters detail how members of the Proud Boys called for blanking war over false claims of a stolen election, referring to government officials as evil scum who should die a traitor's death. 34 of them have been indicted in connection with the siege. Now, I should note that the chairman of the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio, also led the national grassroots organization called Latinos for Trump. Similarly, per today's subpoena, the Oath Keepers plan to move together in coordination and with regular communication to storm the Capitol, which is why 16 of them have been charged with conspiracy. The group's leader, Stewart Rhodes, notably called for Trump to invoke the Insurrection Act, warning that the Oath Keepers would mount a much more desperate and bloody war if he did not do so. Both the Oath Keepers and the First Amendment Praetorian are also known to have provided security for Donald Trump's closest allies, like Roger Stone and Michael Flynn. As Trump's most loyal foot soldiers, it is clear why the committee would want to hear from them. But I want to pause here for a moment to focus on a bigger picture story, which may help to explain why this committee's investigation is so important. Yesterday, the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance released its annual report, rating the health of democracy in more than 160 countries around the world. And the results for this country? Well, they're not good. For the first time, the United States has been classified as a backsliding democracy. That means that unless things change, we are on a path to authoritarian rule, and we could be there within the decade. The report states that the United States, the bastion of global democracy, fell victim to authoritarian tendencies. And the tipping point, according to the report, came when former President Donald Trump questioned the legitimacy of the 2020 election results. To see the world's oldest surviving democracy in decline is worrying. It's disappointing, and it needs to be addressed. But it is not surprising. I mean, does this look like democracy to you? The events of January 6th are glaring proof that Donald Trump never knew what made America great in the first place. I shouldn't have to say this, but attempting a coup against your own government because you lost an election is antithetical to the core tenets of our constitutional republic. Yet Trump continues to celebrate that brazen attack on our democracy. Just today, he attacked free and fair elections themselves, claiming that November 3rd, Election Day, was the real insurrection. But the worst is happening just beneath the surface, where the big lie continues to chip away at the very foundation of this country as a democratic republic. Trump and his Republican allies are working overtime to literally rig the ballot box, giving themselves power to overrule the voters and change the outcome of future elections. The right of every American to vote is under attack. Democrats are being gerrymandered out of power, and those who do get elected have their victories questioned with false allegations of fraud. In fact, 1/3 of all Americans have been hoodwinked into believing that Joe Biden was not actually legitimately elected as our president. Thanks to Trump, Republican candidates today are less likely to concede defeat after a lost election once the vote has been counted. We're increasingly hearing talk of a civil war. And 30%, a third almost, of Republicans say that they believe that they may have to resort to violence in order to, quote, save the country. Now, it is true that democracy itself tends to be resilient. But this is a stark warning sign. Free and fair elections could be a thing of the past. Joining me now is Congressman Eric Swalwell of California. He was an impeachment manager earlier this year. Nancy McLean, professor of history and public policy at Duke University. And David Jolly, former Republican congressman from Florida, who's no longer affiliated with the party. And Congressman, I'm going to start with you. Let me quote a little bit more from these subpoenas. This is what was said that Enrique Tarrio, who's really right now serving 5 months in prison for tearing off a Black Lives Matter banner from an historic black church in D.C., and who actually wasn't in D.C. on the 6th because he was barred from being there. The FBI essentially said, don't even come into town, because he already had these charges of carrying a weapon that he shouldn't have had in D.C. Here's what they said. In discussing killing government officials, one Proud Boy said, yup, day of the rope, referring to a day of mass lynching of race traitors in the white supremacist novel, The Turner Diaries. The leader of the Oath Keepers also encouraged his members to stock up on ammo and prepare for a full-on war in the streets. As someone who was an impeachment manager, as someone who was a prosecutor, what do you make of these subpoenas today?
Joy, we are seeing that no one is off limits, and like any good white-collar prosecution, from the bottom up or outside in, they are starting to get closer and closer to the commander of this insurrection, Donald Trump, and it's important that they do so. We should also note that these Proud Boys, these Oath Keepers, they will have no right to invoke executive privilege, and so any defiance of the subpoenas hopefully will mean that they will be held in contempt to testify. But why this is so concerning, Joy, is because we came so close that day. It was actually only seconds or minutes in some instances where members of Congress, staff, and others could have been killed and the government could have been overthrown. And we have a Republican Party that no longer believes in voting. They believe in violence. They don't condone democracy anymore. They don't condone democracy. And they refuse to condemn the violence. And what that means in your everyday life, imagine if you had an anti-majority way about your everyday life at your bunco club or at your PTA meetings or in your fantasy football league. That would mean that someone could just use the threat of force to enact their will, and the majority would no longer matter. And that's the threat if we don't get this right. And that's why this commission has to continue its work.
You know, and Nancy, you have written so much about the potential fall of the American democratic experiment and the failure of it, both with the judicial rulings that try to put so much power in the hands of the super rich, but now also with what really feels like, and just really definitionally is just open fascism, this sort of brute force politics that the right has embraced, that the Republican Party and their media have embraced, that it is legitimate in their mind and in the minds of a really sizable plurality of the Republican base, that if they don't get their way through the ballot box, they're willing to get it through the bullet. They're willing to get it through mass violence. That is terrifying. We have this commission report saying we are in threat of not being a democracy in a decade. What do you think?
Yeah, I was very pleased to see that report. I felt like yelling hallelujah that others are paying attention to the state of our democracy. You know, as I see it, if we had a democracy clock like the old nuclear clock, we'd be 2 minutes to midnight right now. In military terms, DEFCON 2. What happens going into these next midterms is going to determine the future. So any Americans who aren't paying attention now and aren't part of the solution, I think are going to find, if they don't act and if we don't get get that awakening, there may not be another chance to fix this. As your introduction said, Joy, this is happening on many levels. Donald Trump and the attempted coup that we now realize, was happening on January 6th is certainly the most dramatic element of this. But this is also, in his presidency, is the culmination of a deep radicalization of the Republican Party, driven by billionaire arch-right donors over decades now, but particularly the last decade. And as you point out so importantly in your introduction tonight, this is going on at the state level too, where the worst rule rigging is going on, and it is outside of the sight of much of the media and most of the American people. But they are now, the Republican Party, this radicalized Republican Party, is now changing how elections will be run, where they control state legislatures, and how the votes will be counted. This is on top of the worst gerrymandering we've seen in modern American history. This is on top of all of the voter suppression. This is on top of attacks on the independent judiciary in the states and on the powers of Democratic governors. And it is on top of what Senator Sheldon Whitehouse has rightly called court capture, where this arch-right billionaire donors network, backed by this radicalized and increasingly violent base that you mentioned, has now achieved a Supreme Court majority of 6-3. So they are going to be determining, these people put in place by dark money, and secretive organizations are going to be determining whether what happens in 2022 or 2024 or all these other issues in between is legitimate. Again, I would say DEFCON 2, Americans, please wake up, because there's not going to be a lot more time to sort this out and to right the ship if we fail in this next year.
It is Thursday, the 25th of November of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thanksgiving Day Thursday. That's right, we got all the trimmings here, because you're going to get a little bit of jambalaya and a little bit of spice in your life, at least for this hour. Not doing a jambalaya turkey. I'm doing pretty much a standard turkey. And a few of the other things. I made my pumpkin pie last night, and it is ready to go. Turkey's a little bit, the time is a little bit early to get the turkey in the oven here. But we will be doing that in a few to several hours. So we got that going for us, which is nice. Our neighbors suddenly became orphaned on this Thanksgiving Day. They were going to go on a trip, and right now I can't remember why they had to cancel their little auto trip. But my mother and I decided we were going to have Thanksgiving here rather than go to my sister's, mostly because I don't know how either one of us are going to feel. Because, COVID kind of wore us out, and Mom still is recuperating, though she's been making leaps and bounds in terms of her recovery. About the time that we would be going over to my sister's is about the time we'd be taking a nap, at least Mom would. So I just don't know how we're going to feel. It's impossible to take a nap at somebody else's place, you know that. But anyway, we'll probably FaceTime with my sister. She's only a mile away, if that. And so that's what we decided to do. And since we decided to do that, as only my mother and myself, when our neighbors became orphaned for the day, we decided to invite them over, because I got an 18 to 20 pound turkey. That's more than enough for 2 people, so we might as well feed 5. Yes. And we got all the trimmings, as they say. That was the other thing that I prepared yesterday. Toasted all the bread that I'm going to make for the stuffing, though it's dressing. I don't put it in the bird, mostly because it slows down the bird's cooking. I do put things in the cavity of the bird, like, citrus, herbs, salt and pepper, of course, a few other spices. And so I do that. Root vegetables. I'll throw some celery in there, that kind of thing. But, I don't stuff the bird like we used to back in the day. And like I said, mostly because it interrupts the cooking of the bird and things get a tad dried out on the extremities, and we don't want that. No, we don't. Brine the birds, so I've got that done, and so we'll be having a feast. Rather cold overnight. We are in a freeze, and so I don't know what that means, other than I guess winter is almost upon us. I looked at the weather report, and it looks like we may have some dry days, which means I'm hoping that the cement coating company will be able to come out this next week and coat the patio and walkways, because I don't want to be slipping, and I don't want my mother slipping on icy cement walkways this winter. They got a little backed up, they being the company, in that a lot of their work is inside, and but they do outside work too, driveways and whatnot. But the weather has a lot to do with it, so we needed some dry days for the concrete to dry out. They have a moisture content meter, and I can't remember what the number is, but part of the slab where the patio is was, and I had the gazebo. I had to move the gazebo by myself too. That's how tough I am. Takes usually 3 people, but I did it myself. Don't ask me how. Well, I could tell you how, but I'm not going to get into it, other than the fact that I sort of, tiddly-winked it over, if that makes sense. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't tiddly-winking. Anyway, I was able to get it off the patio slab for these fellows to do their grinding, and they need to grind the walkways too. But it's supposed to take a 2-day process. In that if they finish everything in one day, they still need a day for the solution to really set up. Only a few hours, till my dogs can walk on it. But, it really needs a good 24-hour cure. But the weather has been disrupting the completion of the project. I decided when they were here that I didn't want to pay extra. I'd already paid extra for them to take out some rotted expansion or wood out of an expansion joint that I have to replace. And that was already an extra. I hate paying for extras. I really do. So when they wanted us to pay extra to put some sort of chemical solution to draw out the moisture in the concrete, I decided, let's not do it, because I did read up on it, and there's no guarantee that that is actually a good fix. It's better for the concrete to dry out on its own and then get the coating on it. So I told them, nope, we're going to just have to have you come back, and, I don't know when there's going to be dry days. And it looks like we will have more than a week of dry days. So I'm hoping I can get him in on Monday or Tuesday, because there is a forecast of rain for the weekend after the one coming up. And like I said, I would really like to have those walkways and the patio coated so I can also get the gazebo back on the patio and off the yard. And that way we won't slip on icy walkways, and we don't want that because, well, my mom's elderly, and so am I. That's the problem with having a young mom. A teenage mom is that you get old together. Yes. Oh, some other news. Now, of course, I've filled you in on the divide between my younger brother, the baby in the family, and myself. I'm the oldest. He, as you know, turned into a maggot. Was always, sort of contrarian to everything else that went on in the family. My dad being a world-renowned academic, my brother took no interest in it. Of course, I did. Because, hey, I don't know why, but I did. Anyway, my brother drops out of high school, and, he did get his GED, but he is a wheeler dealer, and he made millions and millions and millions of dollars running the second largest auto wholesale auction in Southern California, as well as having some dealerships. And he owned a few detail companies too, so he made a bit of money in the auto industry. And then later in life, when I say later in life, about the age of 50, he decided, well, he was going to get into acting, sort of like acting. As you know, I was a thespian in high school and college, and I did try my hand at acting, and it is very difficult. I turned down, in fact, I've mentioned this before, I turned down a production gig on the original Gong Show. Mostly because, well, I don't want my legacy tied up with a Gong Show. What a mistake. I could have had some insurance coverage by the Screen Actors Guild. What was I thinking? I guess I was just too full of myself. But anyway, my brother has also made quite a bit of money in Hollywood. I will note that a movie that he was in, I think Joe the Fighter Pilot, I think that's what it's called, is rated the worst movie ever made in Hollywood. My brother starred in it. So, that's cool. Anyway, I only mention this stuff because of his politics. They're such at odds with what the rest of the family is. I mean, the kid never walked precincts. He never took an interest in politics other than, I don't know, what his friends at the auto dealership told him. And he has adopted that ignorance quite well, and right up to the flying of the Trump flags and, being pretty much a dick. But that said, he is in the hospital. He had a hernia in his esophagus. Now, I'm not violating HIPAA, all right, because I'm not in the medical professional field and divulging this to a third party. I'm family, so that's not a HIPAA violation. But anyway, the surgery took considerably longer than anticipated, and from what I hear from my sister, is that he had let this damage go for quite a while and then damaged it further because, he knows more about science than the people who actually completed their education and then worked in their field for decades. Don't listen to them. He knows more because he does his research. Well, his research wasn't research enough, and he is suffering it now. And the doctor didn't really give my sister any positive outcome after the surgery. It was rather a matter of fact, and my sister, being a nurse, got very concerned. Because normally doctors like to tell the family something good, and there was not really anything good, shall we say. It wasn't necessarily bad, but the lack of positivity has my sister concerned that this surgery may not have been successful and my brother may be in dire straits. So regardless of our political disagreements, he's still my brother. I will still love him. I still do. He bugs the hell out of me, but he's still my brother. I mean, that's what we are as human beings, and I suppose that is also a divide between how we and they, with a capital T, think. Because I suppose it's easier for them, with a capital T, to, break the ties that bind because of politics, petty politics. On the other hand, when you're a Nazi, nothing is petty. Not at all. And we better understand that, because we may consider something to be a petty concern, and it is a major concern to the Nazi. But I want to probably not speak so much about the issues that my brother and I have that divide us, but meditate more on the bounds of heart, which is really much more important in this existence than any sort of strategizing about politics. Is there politics in heaven? If there is a heaven? Gee, I hope not. Of course, all the literature shows that, wow, man, it's pretty dramatic up there. The angels are fighting each other. I don't know. Well, that's us imposing our belief system on heaven, whatever heaven is. So, how's your Thursday this Thanksgiving Day, huh? Okay. Well, I should mention also, since my mother and I have both been vaxxed, and of course, since we've both been sick, we're still carrying some antibodies, so we're ostensibly protected quite a bit. Now my neighbors also, or our neighbors, have also been duly protected. So we'll have the interior of the house. It's not supposed to be terribly cold during the day, mid-50s. I'm giving the weather report before the weather report. Anyway, so maybe maybe with the oven and everything else running, we'll open up a window or two and get some cross ventilation. Otherwise, the train system, not railroad train, but the company train, that the forced air heating and air conditioning unit is quite efficient. And I can turn that air filter on, and it really does. It's as good of almost as good as a air filter as the little Honeywell that we have in my mom's room. So at the very least, we can do that. But I do like, when there's not smelly smoke from people's fireplaces, from their stinky, punky wood. It's nice to have some fresh air. It's just not so fresh when it's this pungent, punky wood burning in people's fireplaces. Why do they do that? That just creates creosote and coats the inside of their chimney and then can cause a fire. Jeez, people. Well, we did curate a show today. I had thought about maybe having clips of, the Thanksgiving Day memes and whatnot. It being a colonizer holiday, and all. But we decided to go ahead and have pretty much a regular show on this Thanksgiving Day Thursday, indeed. So what is curated for you today? Well, at the top, the January 6th committee is getting closer to the Commander of Insurrection, because that's what he did. On the rest of the menu, the Department of Justice directed U.S. attorneys across the country to swiftly prioritize prosecution of federal crimes that happen on commercial air flights. 2 women of color are President Joe Biden's picks to lead the White House Budget Office. Those are both firsts. And a $9 billion highway widening project in Houston has sparked a debate over racial inequity with infrastructure projects in the U.S. Yeah, let's put a freeway, and we'll put those people on the other side of it. Good luck crossing. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Mexico's president nominated the first woman to serve as governor of the country's central bank. And this is a day after the first woman was appointed to the Supreme Court in Mexico. Wow. And 3 Mexican women who volunteered to investigate the 2011 massacre of 193 people later found out that they themselves had been placed under investigation by prosecutors. They didn't want to be embarrassed, and I mean the prosecutors. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is our chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Kelly's been a little bit under the weather, plus she's been working her rear end off in real life, so thank you, Kelly, for everything that you do. And good news, I suppose I can go ahead and divulge this because I'm not a medical professional, so I'm not violating HIPAA. But there was a bit of concern that she might have contracted COVID because the building that she's in, about half or more remain unvaccinated, so that's not a good thing. But she did test negative, so that is a very good thing. And so hang in there, Kelly, and thank you truly for everything that you do. If you would then look across the page from that chat room link, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you will hopefully notice the link to our Patreon page. And if you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance, and if you could afford to send those funds our way once a month, it really helps us pay our bills. Though the bulk of what we do here comes out of our own wallets, we would still be unable to do it without you. And so thank you for your generosity in allowing us to pay our bills, fly under the radar, and continue this resistance against the hostile takeover of the United States of America. Thank you. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. And thank you, Tom, and he's a busy fellow as well. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime. Get that linked up, hopefully before showtime, on Twitter and other social media platforms. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. All right, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy on this Thanksgiving Day Thursday is by Michael Balsamo out of the Associated Press. Attorney General Merrick Garland directed U.S. attorneys across the country to swiftly prioritize prosecution of federal crimes that happen on commercial flights as federal officials face a historic number of investigations into passenger behavior. Now, let's be clear. There's been a tremendous amount of brainwashing going on. Why would we be having a spike in this type of behavior across a population? What would explain that? The mind reels in consideration, does it not? Garland's memo issued yesterday, Wednesday, emphasizes that the Justice Department is committed to aggressively prosecuting violent passengers who assault crew members or endanger the safety of other passengers. Federal law prohibits interfering with a flight crew, including assaulting, intimidating, or threatening crew members. In a statement, Garland said such passengers do more than harm employees. They prevent the performance of critical duties that help ensure safe air travel. Similarly, when passengers commit violent acts against other passengers in the close confines of a commercial aircraft, the conduct endangers everyone aboard, he said. The memo also notes that dozens of incidents have been reported to the FBI by the Federal Aviation Administration as part of an information sharing protocol between the two agencies. The FAA said earlier this month that it had launched 950 investigations into passenger behavior on flights this year. That is the highest total since the agency started keeping track in 1995. In the 5 years, from 2016 through 2020, the agency averaged 136 investigations a year, and I wonder why that was during those years. The agency also said it had referred 37 cases involving unruly airline passengers to the FBI for possible criminal prosecution since the number of disruptions on flights began to spike in January. Airlines and their unions have pressed the federal government to push more aggressively for criminal prosecution. Airlines have reported more than 5,000 incidents involving unruly passengers this year alone, with more than 3,600 of those involving people who refused to wear face masks as required by federal regulation and who told them not to wear a mask. The Department of Justice is committed to using its resources to do its part to prevent violence, intimidation, threats of violence, and other criminal behavior that endangers the safety of passengers, flight crews, and flight attendants on commercial aircraft, Garland said in the statement. The international president of the Association of Flight Attendants, Sarah Nelson, also applauded Garland's announcement. Consequences need to be swift and clear to keep travel safe and protect the people on the front lines who have worked through all the stresses of this pandemic, Nelson said. We want to take people to New Orleans, Seattle, Fort Lauderdale, or to see Grandma. We do not want to take them to jail. But the DOJ can now make it clear that's where you're going if you refuse to cooperate and act out violently on a plane. Superbill and Alexandra Jaffe of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grits Thanksgiving Day Thursday. 2 women of color are President Joe Biden's picks to lead the White House Budget Office, a milestone for the powerful agency after his first choice withdrew following criticism over her previous attacks on lawmakers from both parties. If confirmed by the Senate, Shalonda Young would become the first black woman in charge of the Office of Management and Budget, while Nancy Coloretti, a Filipino-American, I think that would be Filipina, but regardless, would serve as Young's deputy, making Coloretti one of the highest-ranking Asian Americans in government. Today, it's my honor to nominate 2 extraordinary, history-making women to lead the Office of Management and Budget, Biden said in a video announcement released yesterday, Wednesday, while he spends the Thanksgiving Day holiday on Nantucket Island in Massachusetts, as he always does. Fox News, he's not doing anything untoward. He always goes to Nantucket, so shut up. She has continued to impress me and congressional leaders as well, Biden said of Young, who has been the acting director for most of the year. Biden turned to Young after his first nominee for budget director, Neera Tanden, came under bipartisan criticism, and you know why? Because she's a lady of color, too. Senator Joe Manchin, a West Virginia Democrat who has become a pivotal vote for Biden's agenda in a chamber split 50-50, was the first Democrat to oppose Tanden's nomination, and lacking the necessary votes, she ultimately withdrew from consideration. Guess who Manchin and Sinema are going after now? Yeah, the lady from Kazakhstan that we reported on earlier in the week when John Kennedy, that fool, John Kennedy of the Confederacy of Dunces, John Kennedy, questioned her in the most racist way that you could imagine. Now Joe Manchin and Sinema are going after her because she takes Wall Street to task. Are the bankers pulling the strings on Sinema and Manchin? I don't know. Is that a rhetorical question? It probably is. Biden later gave Tanden a job in the White House where she is staff secretary and a senior presidential advisor. So there you go, Joe. And I'm talking about Joe Manchin. There you go. Young faces a Senate confirmation vote, though it was not immediately clear how soon it would be scheduled, but she was confirmed as deputy director in March on a 63-37 vote with backing from more than a dozen Republicans. Young, who previously was staff director for the House Appropriations Committee, also has support from top Democratic leaders, including House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Pelosi said in a statement, Young's nomination is well-deserved. Other Democratic lawmakers expressed support for Young on Twitter. Good call, wrote Senator John Tester of Montana. And Senator Van Hollen, a member of the Budget Committee, which will vote first on the nominations, tweeted that Young's leadership is just what we need to implement a federal budget that prioritizes the American people. Colleretti would rejoin the federal government from her current post at the Urban Institute think tank, where she is senior vice president overseeing financial and business strategy. Her prior federal government service includes deputy secretary at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, assistant secretary for management at the Treasury Department, and acting chief operating officer at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Biden said Young and Colleretti are two of the most experienced, qualified people to lead the budget office, and called on the Senate to vote quickly to confirm them. Juan A. Lozano and Hope Yen of the Associated Press brings us this final offering in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A $9 billion highway widening project being proposed in the Houston area could become an important test of the Biden administration's commitment to addressing what it has said is a history of racial inequity with infrastructure projects in the U.S. The project's critics, including community groups and some residents, say it won't improve the area's traffic woes and would subject mostly Black and Latino residents to increased pollution, displacement, and flooding, while not improving public transportation options. Its supporters counter the proposed 10-year construction project would remake 24 miles along Interstate 45 and several other roadways, would enhance driver safety, help reduce traffic congestion, and address flood mitigation and disaster evacuation needs for people that don't live there, apparently. The project, which has been in the works for nearly 2 decades, has remained on hold since March as the Federal Highway Administration reviews civil rights and environmental justice concerns raised about the proposal. Harris County, where Houston is located, has also filed a federal lawsuit alleging state officials ignore the project's impacts on neighborhoods. The dispute over the project comes as Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg has pledged to make racial equity a top priority of his department. The impacts of misguided transportation policy is something that has disproportionately happened in Black and brown communities and neighborhoods, Buttigieg said last December in response to a question from Rodney Ellis, a commissioner in Harris County. The I-45 project is expected to displace more than 1,000 homes and apartments along with 344 businesses, 2 schools, and 5 places of worship in mostly Black and Latino neighborhoods. Now, when they say 1,000 homes, how many people live in each of those homes? It's very racially unjust, Molly Cook said with StopText.I-45, one of the community groups opposing the project. And she said that as she stood in a cul-de-sac in North Houston where 10 homes were expected to be torn down because of the widening. We're going to spend all this money to make the traffic worse and hurt a lot of people. Indeed. Fabian Ramirez, age 40, whose family has lived since the 60s in a neighborhood near downtown Houston, said if the project goes through, he could be forced to sell property he owns. It's taken my family generations for me to get to this position where I can say this property right next to downtown is mine. And to have the government come and take the property away as soon as I obtain it is nerve-wracking, Ramirez said. The Texas Department of Transportation, commonly known as TxDOT, and the 5 members of the Texas Transportation Commission that govern it have pushed back on claims the project promotes racial inequity. Agency spokesman Bob Kaufman said Tuesday that TxDOT has worked extensively with local governments and communities to develop tangible solutions to concerns. This project cannot be everything that everybody wants or that everybody believes in. However, it can be transformational for the region and the state, so F the little people. F them to hell. Yes, that's exactly what he said. Well, in this reporter's opinion. Okay, let's get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
1 in 6 Americans get sick from eating contaminated food each year. Contamination caused by salmonella is especially common. It's sometimes found in poultry, eggs, ground beef, pork, and even peanut butter. To reduce your risk from this and other foodborne germs, remember to clean, separate, cook, and chill. Clean your hands with soap and water. Separate raw meat, poultry, and seafood from other foods. Wash counters, cutting boards, and utensils before and after using them. Cook all food thoroughly and use a food thermometer to make sure food is cooked. Promptly chill meat, poultry, eggs, and other perishables. Finally, don't prepare food for others if you're sick, and be extra careful when you prepare food for children, pregnant women, the elderly, or people in poor health. To learn more about making food safer to eat, visit www.cdc.gov/vital signs.
I'm probably okay to have one more drink before I drive home. I'm probably okay. I open the window to stay alert. Probably okay. I just popped some gum in my mouth.
Step out of the car, please.
I probably made a mistake.
Probably okay isn't okay when it comes to drinking and driving. If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend. Buzzed driving is drunk driving. A message brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
It's time to talk turkey. No, not the butterball sitting in the Oval Office. I'm talking about the real thing, the big bird, 46 million of which we Americans will devour on this Thanksgiving Day. It was the Aztecs who first domesticated the gallo pavo, but leave it to the Spanish explorers to foul up the bird's origins. They declared it to be related to the peacock. Wrong. They also thought the peacock originated in Turkey. Wrong. And they thought Turkey was located in Africa. Well, you can see the Spanish were pretty confused. Actually, the origin of Thanksgiving is confused. The popular assumption is that it was first celebrated by the Mayflower immigrants and the Wampanoag natives at Plymouth, Massachusetts, 1621. They feasted on venison, turkeys, Wampanoag for gobblers, eels, mussels, corn, and beer. But wait, say Virginians, the first precursor to our annual November Foodapalooza was not in Massachusetts. The Thanksgiving feast originated down here in Jamestown Colony back in 1608. Whoa there, hold your horses, pilgrims. Folks in El Paso, Texas, say it all began way out there in 1598, when Spanish settlers sat down with the people of the Piro and Manso tribes, gave thanks, then feasted on roasted duck, geese, and fish. Ha, says a Florida group, asserting that the very, very first Thanksgiving happened in 1565, when the Spanish settlers of San Augustine and friends from the Temuacan tribe chowed down on cocido, a stew of salt pork, garbanzo beans, and garlic, washing it all down with red wine. This is Jim Hightower saying, wherever it began and whatever the purists claim is official, Thanksgiving today is as multicultural as America. So let's enjoy, kick back, give thanks we're in a country with such ethnic richness, and dive into your turkey rellenos, mushu turkey, turkey falafel, barbecue.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. With the collapse of Roman rule in Britain around 410 AD, small kingdoms emerged throughout Britain. The disappearance of Roman administration of Britain was sudden and dramatic. Britain was a long way from Rome, and the people of Britain reverted to cultural patterns that were present before the Roman invasion. Britain was invaded in the 5th century AD by Germanic tribes that we now call the Anglo-Saxons. These tribes dominated southern England, and soon the entire country, forming a ruling elite. Several Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were formed in England, each of which had various subdivisions. With the arrival of Christianity, the monarch's power was seen as having come from God, and all the people became subject to his or her rule. Because of the large size of the territory the monarch governed, local areas were allowed generally to tend to their own affairs according to local custom. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1947. That was the day that the front page of the Chicago Tribune printed a banner headline, "Newspaper Printers Quit." 1,600 members of the International Typographical Union Local 16 had gone out on strike against 6 Chicago newspapers. The key reason for the strike was wages. The union also wanted the publishers to agree to hire only union labor. The walkout was part of a wave of printer strikes in the United States and Canada. In all, union members from 43 newspapers from 27 cities went out on strike. Most newspapers were able to keep printing during the walkouts, but many had to reduce the number of editions or make changes in how the paper was produced. According to an article published by the Associated Press, some are using a photo engraving process to circumvent their composing rooms, while others continue to use the normal methods. The Chicago strike wore on for 22 months. The strike also became an important labor struggle after the passage of the Taft-Hartley legislation. The legislation, approved by Congress earlier that year over President Harry Truman's veto, restricted the rights of labor unions, including outlawing the closed shop. Since the typographical unions were some of the oldest trade unions in the country, the strike became an important battleground over how Taft-Hartley would be interpreted. The American Newspaper Publishers Association hoped that Taft-Hartley could be a tool in smashing the strike. The courts sided with the publishers and demanded the union drop their demand for a closed shop. In the end, the union did win a $10 raise, a little more than 2/3 the amount they asked for during the strike. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits, Thanksgiving Day, Thursday. We're going to forego the local weather forecast since I pretty much gave it during the body of the show and jump right into weather from around the world. And weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. London is 45 degrees and sunny. Paris is 44 and cloudy. Rome is 60 degrees with showers in the vicinity. Kyiv is 38 and cloudy. Kabul is 50 and clear. Hong Kong is 64 degrees and clear. Tokyo is 56 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 69 degrees and cloudy. San Francisco, California is 51 and clear. And New York is 42 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. Staff at the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Mexico's president nominated the first woman to serve as governor of the country's central bank yesterday, Wednesday, saying that getting women into high office was a priority. The move comes one day after another female justice was named to the Supreme Court. Women continue to be a priority, President Obrador said. For the first time, a woman is going to head the Bank of Mexico. But there was little room for celebration about the nomination of Victoria Rodriguez-Sella to head the Bank of Mexico. She still must be approved by the Senate. The Mexican peso dropped to $21.44 to $1 U.S., chalking up a loss of almost 2.5% in 2 days, and the country's Statistics Institute said annual inflation was running at about 7% in late November, neither of which were good signs. Banco Base said in a report that the nomination of Rodriguez-Sella, who currently serves as an assistant finance secretary, was a surprise for markets and generated uncertainty about expectations from the central bank's monetary policy. The central bank has been slow to raise its base interest rate, currently around 5%, but the bank has to walk a fine line to avoid choking off the economic recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. On Tuesday, Loretta Ortiz was named to Mexico's Supreme Court, 4 of whose 11 justices are now women.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Ever more staff at the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thanksgiving Day, Thursday. 3 women who volunteered to investigate the 2011 massacre of 193 people later found out that they themselves had been placed under investigation by prosecutors, possibly because their findings embarrassed Mexican authorities. The 3 women said their phone calls had been traced and that they had been placed under surveillance. All three have spent years investigating the cases of Mexico's approximately 93,000 disappeared, mostly people thought to have been killed by drug cartels, their bodies dumped into shallow graves or burned. In 2011, authorities found 48 clandestine graves containing the bodies of 193 people in the northern border state of Tamaulipas. Most had their skulls crushed with sledgehammers, and many were Central American migrants. It was later revealed the victims had been pulled off passing buses by the old Zetas drug cartel and forced to fight each other with hammers or be killed if they refused to work for the cartel. But instead of spending its time looking for the killers, the Federal Attorney General's office decided to investigate the researchers in 2015 and 2016 for alleged organized crime violations. Well, that's a miscarriage of justice, and it also brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.